Here on the screen is an annual report. I have these annual reports come across my desk all day, every day. We do one of these for every single property, every single owner, every single year, where we look at the property and say, hey, what was it? What did we invest? What's our return look like? Do we like it? Do we not like it? How are we feeling about it? So let's break this annual report down together, and then I'll just teach some lessons that you can learn through looking at a well-constructed annual report. Number one, this house is in Memphis, Tennessee. We've had this house for 4 years. We do these annual reports along the actual anniversary of the property. As you can see here, the investor put up $54,000 to buy a house that was worth $207,000. Now, here's the first place that people will lie to you. When it comes to real estate, I would always advise you have at least a 3 to 7 year hold plan. And the reason for that is the transactional cost around real estate can be really prohibitive. You can end up having to bring a lot of money to the table, even if you see some appreciation. So you're going to do your down payment, but on top of that, you're going to have closing costs on a property like this, probably $6,000 or $7,000. On top of that, if you're working with any turnkey house like Bedrock or like one of the big turnkey houses that helps people kind of done for you style real estate, semi-passive, if you're going to work with any of those houses, they're all charging between $5,000 to $8,000. Some of them charge an upfront fee just to work with their team between $10,000 and $30,000 just to look at their pre-vetted product that they've got. No matter what you're doing, there's going to be some fees. There's going to be at least closing costs. There's going to be at least title work. There's going to be at least title insurance. There's going to be at least recording. Most states have some sort of stamps or transactional taxes when it comes to real estate. But when people talk about your investment, they're like, oh yeah, what was your down payment? Bull freaking crap. There's more than that. There's your down payment. There's your closing costs. There's your acquisition fees. That is primarily the reason that I tell people don't invest in real estate unless you want to hold it for at least 3 years. And the reason for that is you're not just paying 100% for a good piece of real estate, right? You're also paying closing costs, maybe another 6% in closing costs, maybe another 1% in realtor fees or whatever, right? You're probably paying between 105% to 107% just to get the property into your name. That's also the reason that at Bedrock, we don't just have properties sitting in a fund that we're going to sell you. Because truth is, if I just went out there and bought, real estate is a terrible inventory product. All right? Because I would be paying the extra 7% of closing costs. And then when you wanted the property, you would be paying the 7% of closing costs again. Because you would need your own title insurance policy. You would need your own protections in place. You would need your own mortgage. You would need your own recording stamps for the county, the transactional stamps. You might need to pay your own Obamacare transactional tax. And so the truth is, there's all those closing costs every time you close. Most pro formas that I see only use down payment, right? The down payment on this property was only about $45,000. Okay, so let's break this out and talk about just one of the little nuances in language that can cause your returns to be really overstated, like to be really dishonest with your returns. So let's say you're buying this exact property that I just put up, 207 grand. So our purchase price, 207.5. All right, down payment, $40,000. And then you have your closing costs. That's going to be everything from prorated insurance, prorate HOA, prorate prop taxes, title insurance, local stamp recording fee, right? There's all sorts of crap that kind of gets tacked on. And then you have your closing fee or escrow fee. And then you have your 1031, qualified intermediary fee, right? When you transact real estate, it's not just the purchase price. That's very important to understand. You've got to understand there's all these other things that pop up, and those will easily range between 3% to 7%, depending on how much of the realtor commission you're paying. Now, in a lot of markets, seller pays closing fees, seller pays the realtor commission. But that's not necessarily guaranteed anymore because of the National Real Estate Association lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. All right? So it's not even really guaranteed anymore. So we have to throw in realtor commission. So what I'm trying to say is closing costs can easily be between 3% to 7% when you buy a home. And so if it's on the low end, it could easily be another 2 grand. On the high end, it could easily be 14 grand. Right? Just trying to help you all understand. There's all of these closing costs and fees that are associated with buying a property. So even though your down payment might be $40,000, there's going to be between $6,000 and $14,000 of fees that you're going to have to pay. And so what I want everyone to understand going into this is even if your down payment's only 40, there's also some other costs that are ancillary. For this reason, it's the reason that you never want to get into real estate and out of real estate in the same year. So when you buy a piece of real estate, you're having to pay the prorated insurance, right? Whatever's left of the year. You're having to pay whatever prorated HOA, whatever's left of the year. You're having to pay your prorated property taxes, whatever's left of the year. You've got to pay your title insurance because you want an insurance policy that you own this thing free and clear and no one's ever going to be able to come back and, haunt you with that. You've got to pay your recording tax, your recording fees, closing fees. You've got to pay qualified intermediary fees, realtor commissions, if you've got them. That's the only one so far on the list that you might not pay because a lot of times seller pay the realtor fees. Yes and no sometimes. And then inspections, clearly you're going to pay those. And so what I'm trying to help people understand is when you buy a piece of property, you're not paying hundreds of dollars for that property. You're probably paying about 103, 104 and a half cent dollars. So when you buy a property, you pay 104% of the value of the property. Let's just say, even though you're buying it for 207, you're probably paying something closer to 215. Now, when you sell a property, a lot of these same fees recur. Just because you bought a property doesn't mean you don't have to pay this anymore. When you sell a property, you got to pay whatever's left on the year for your prorated insurance. You've got to pay whatever's left on your HOA for your prorated. You've got to pay whatever's left on property taxes. You don't pay for necessarily a title insurance policy. That's the buyer that buys that. But you might have to pay some transactional fees, like the Obamacare 3.8 transactional tax is still going to be there. You don't have to pay the recording fees on sale. Some, buyer pays those. Closing fees, escrow fees, you've got to pay something for your lawyer to draw this crap up and sign it, or your title company to do that. And then qualified intermediate, that's a buy-side transaction. Realtor commissions, you're usually paying that when you sell. And then inspections, that's usually the buyer. And so it's not the same fees, but a lot of the same fees get transacted when you buy a property and when you sell a property. And it's important to understand that the biggest one of all of those is these realtor commissions, right? You can buy a property for 3 or 4% over the price for all your transactional cost. But when you sell a property, especially if the seller is paying the realtor commissions, that is easily going to be 7.5% of your purchase or your sales price is going to go out the window in realtor commissions. 3% for buyer typical, 3% for seller typical, 1.5% for the rest of your associated fees. So what I want to help everyone understand is you never want to transact a piece of real estate in the same year unless you've done substantial improvements. Like if you're flipping, that's a different thing. But if you're just buying property to build wealth, you need to plan on even the most limited purchase to be a 5 to 7 year hold. And the reason for that is this. Let's say that on the front end you end up with a 4% fee, 4% closing cost. And then when you sell, you end up with a 7.5% closing cost. And let's just assume you had to do it in the same year, and because you had to do it in the same year, you bought and you sold off that same price. You bought and sold off that same price. And so really you were saying, okay. You were saying the fees. So that means when you buy this $207,000 house, you're paying, let's say, 4% in fees, which works out to like $8,300. So you actually pay about 215 grand for the house. That's with any real estate. Any transaction in real estate is going to have fees like this. Now, I'm not being exhaustive. I'm not trying to take forever, and I'm not, a closing expert. I'm not looking at a HUD right now. These are just off the top of my head. So you're going to end up paying about $215 for the house. Anyone who's ever bought a piece of real estate knows that. When you sell that same house, even if you sold it for that same exact price, right? You then have to pay closing fees again. Now they're different, but they're higher on the seller side of the transaction typically. So you're probably talking another $15,000 when you sell a house. And so what that means is you can buy a house and sell a house in the same year, but your break even at that point would need to be selling that house for $231,000 even though you bought it for 207, right? So just because of the transactional fee nature of real estate and all the pieces that go into making sure that you own the property outright and that you have an insurance policy and all the lawyers that it takes to draw it up and the back and forth with the realtors, real estate is a terrible in and out asset short term. Even if you're buying into a REIT, they're always going to say 5 to 7 year buy and hold, right? Even if you're buying into a syndication, they're going to say 5 to 7 year buy and hold. If you're buying your own property, single family residential, which I specialize in, that's my bread and butter, I'm still going to say 5 to 7 year buy and hold. Now, you can get out of single family residential earlier if you need to, and those other commingled assets you can't. But I would always advise against selling early. And my reason for that is the transactional costs can really add up. Now, let's just say that we have an appreciation table running here. And let's say we expect appreciation to run at roughly 5% a year. I think that's a reasonable expectation. That's the number I use for Bedrock. If I'm candid, I expect all of our assets to appreciate at about 5% a year. And so any given year, we're going to say the purchase price multiplied by 5%. So $207,000 times 5%, that gives you your single year estimated appreciation for the year. And what we can put right here is what would my property value roughly be worth at the end of that year. Now, if we just drag that down, we can see what our next year would be, what our appreciation would be on the higher number, and then if we drag that down, we can see what our value would be given a new appreciation number, and now we've built a simple appreciation compounding appreciation table, right? What you can see here is you buy your property for 207, it appreciates at roughly 5% a year. That means your first year you get about 10 grand in appreciation. The property's worth about 217 grand. If the property is worth about 217 grand and still goes up by about 5%, that number starts to compound for you. 11 grand, value's up. 12 grand, 13, 14, 15. We're really seeing compounding appreciation over time. That's the way it happens. We see it every day, all day, probably a little better than 5% if I'm candid. Some of our markets are appreciating super well. And so you'll see here, there is a break-even point. Right? If I went and said, hey, my all in to clear, like I need 231 just to pay for the property purchase price, to pay myself back, to pay all the ancillary fees that are involved on the front end and the back end, I need about 231 to break even, not have to bring money to the table. All right, that's going to happen in year 2 or year 3, depending on how long I'm holding the property. Now, past that, it just compounds. On a 7-year hold, we might be looking at, okay, $60,000 of appreciation over 7 years. But one of the things I want to be really clear about for today is you never want to transact property in the same year if you can avoid it, because that transactional costs can absolutely eat you alive. So that's a good lesson for today. Don't transact real estate in the same year. Real estate, because of its transactional expenses, is really not a good liquid asset. If you need your assets more liquid, just keep them in something else. Keep them in an ETF, right? Keep them in a stock that you can sell pretty easily. Probably an ETF, just a low-cost ETF. All right? So hopefully that is a good lesson for today. All right, if you enjoyed that, a really in-depth breakdown of one piece of real estate investment with a lot of experience behind it. Keep in mind, Bedrock has done over 5,000 properties since like 2010, right? So, with that being the case, if you like that breakdown of try to understand the ins and outs of real estate in an honest conversation, I think the video you'll like the most from here is don't buy real estate here. It's like the number one key to real estate investing. And in that video, we sit down and do a similar thing where we talk through what's the number one most important thing to consider if you're considering buying in your market or another market. How do you get to an apples to apples comparison of what's a good deal and what's not? That video, we sit down and we just keep talking through and giving you different examples, North Carolina examples, Tennessee examples, California examples. And I think by the end of that video, you can see there are some numbers you can boil this all down to say, is this even a deal worth considering or not? If you want to see that video, click right here. Love you guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.